Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our February 2020 third Tuesday at 3 webcast event, Lift and Shift. My name is Alan Falcon. I'm the CEO and Pragmatic Evangelist here at Cumulus Global. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day and week to join us here this afternoon live, or to be taking the time to watching this, the recording of this session on demand at your convenience. So appreciate you participating and taking advantage of the information and the content that we like and are able to share with you, our customers, other businesses, other organizations as well. So thank you very much. Before we get into things too much, there are a couple of housekeeping issues that need to be dealt with. And let me just reset my presentation here so that the frames are advancing properly. There we go. And before we get into it, sorry about that little confusion on my part. I guess I'll have to edit that out, fix it in post-production. Before we get started today, there's always some housekeeping. As you may have noticed, the audio is muted. That prevents any background noise from interfering with the session here today. So if at any point in time you have a comment or a question, along the top or right side of your screen, there's some icons from our GoToWebinar system. Click on the one that opens the questions window. That's the best way to reach me. It tracks to make sure I know people have asked questions and helps me make sure we get them all answered before we wrap up here today. In addition to taking questions that may come up as we go, we have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. This, as with all of our webcasts, the session's being recorded. It'll be up on our website. We'll send you a link. Generally within 24 hours, we're able to get everything processed and positioned. And so feel free to share that recording with associates if you think they'll find the content valuable. Before I get into things, a couple of other events and reminders about resources. Our April third Tuesday at 3, I should say our March 3rd Tuesday at 3 is going to be a fresh look at Chrome. We've seen great success with Chrome in the education market. We're starting to see small, mid-sized businesses using Chrome devices to leverage their cloud-based solutions, lower their cost of hardware, simplify their IT admin. There's some advantages. Granted, it's not for everyone, but we'll talk about where Chrome can be successful as part of your business or as a fundamental replacement potentially for your traditional Macintosh and Windows hardware. All of our third Tuesday at 3 webcasts are on demand, as well as our Coffee and Cloud webcasts, our most recent being one on breach response, which is really discussion of the services you need to be you need to be sure in place should you be the victim of a ransomware attack that may or may not, or you're not sure of, has a breach of confidential information. And so it goes beyond just, how do you recover from the ransomware, how do you get your data back, to the forensic issues, the legal issues, public relations and customer relationship, and customer service issues that you have to deal with, in a way to do that cost effectively without breaking the bank, and be able to do it quickly and stay in compliance with the increasing number of state and federal rules with regard to disclosure and reporting. So it's a great, quick 15-20 minute webcast that covers that. Also, we've been pushing out advanced threat protection. It's a program we're running for all of our customers to make sure they have the additional protections against advanced phishing and malware and ransomware attacks with their email services. If it's something you're interested in, you have questions about, one of the things we're willing to do is do a free scan of the dark web to see if any of your identities have been compromised for your business domain. If that's something of interest, you'll see my contact information towards the end of the session. Feel free to send me an email. Happy to get that done for you and provide you and share that information. And of course, if you see or hear anything or want to take a look at something, we offer a range of demos and trials for the various cloud services that we work with and that we offer. So contact us. We're happy to get a cloud advisor on the phone with you, discuss your needs, and point you in the right direction. Even if it's something you're just curious about, hey, I want to take a look at that, I'm not sure it's for me, we're happy to take the time to connect you with a trial or a demo so you can make that evaluation. That said, let's dive into this week's content, which is lift and shift. And I think the first thing I need to do is define it, because I've got folks who, friends of mine who work in the exercise world, and lift and shift means something very different to them than it does to myself as an IT provider. So with respect to IT, lift and shift is really about, no rocket science here. It's about moving on-premise servers, whether they're physical servers or virtualized servers, to a cloud resident server environment. Another common term for this is rehosting. Basically, you're moving it from, a physical server in your computer room or a virtual machine running on a physical device in your computer room, or maybe even in a co-location center someplace, and moving it into a server that exists in a cloud-based infrastructure. This move can be done as is or with some modifications, and we'll talk about what some of those modifications might be as we go through the session here this afternoon. So we take a step back and look at, how do you get from on-premise into the cloud? There are really 6 choices that you have. One is, hey, we don't need this system at all. Let's retire it. It's not serving a purpose. We don't actually use it. We can accomplish that capability someplace else. A lot of people think, gee, what do I have that I could retire that I don't need anymore? In many cases, we find folks, running redundant systems or redundant capabilities in their IT environment. We can help them retire the ones that aren't fiscally viable or necessary to run their business. The other thing is you can retain the system as it is. You might look at it and say, nope, this isn't something that can move to the cloud, or at least not yet. There isn't a clear path for it. There's no clear advantage from an operational standpoint, from a business objectives or business outcome standpoint, or from a cost standpoint. The key, though, whenever you decide to retain, you should set a period of time in the future where you're going to do that reevaluation. Make sure you come back and take a look at it, because what might not make sense moving to the cloud today, in 6, 9, 12 months might be a perfect candidate for going forward. And certainly we've seen that in the shift in what small and mid-sized businesses are doing in the cloud over the last 2 years, particularly. When we started in this business, it was ancillary services like email security and compliance, where we were really using cloud services to augment on-premise email servers and making on-premise email more operationally, perform better, more available, more reliable, and improve overall quality of service. That sort of migrated into, well, let's get that email into the cloud itself and provide better access and better support for mobile devices. As that trend happened, and those email services grew rapidly into full, productivity suites. Hey, we can share and manage our files in the cloud. We can edit in the cloud and store our documents there. We can share in real time. We're device independent. We're location independent. We're more secure. It's easier to back up and recover. We saw that shift for the small mid-sized business. And while larger companies have long used the cloud to rebuild their services, and we'll talk about rebuilding applications and systems in a little bit, small mid-sized businesses haven't been there. They've been focused on SaaS applications. Hey, let's get a CRM application. Let's get a marketing tool. Let's get a specific software as a service solution that meets a specific job function or department function or business need or business outcome to do it. Now we're starting to see more of a fundamental realization or use of more fundamental services in the cloud that says, wait a minute, we can put our file sharing in the cloud. We don't need file servers anymore. Let's start looking at our application servers. And in some cases, we've moved to cloud-based applications. In other cases, they don't exist, or what we have is customized and can't migrate to an off-the-shelf cloud service. What options do we have? We still want to head in that direction and benefit from the infrastructure, the scalability, and the potential cost savings of cloud, even for something that isn't per se cloud ready. Okay, and so there is that retain or go decision that needs to be made. The key is, abilities, capabilities, cost benefit analysis. Those will change at times and over time and continue to get better with respect to what small and mid-sized companies are looking for. So if you decide to retain something on premise, make sure you put it in the planner that 9 months from now you're going to, or 6 months or 18 months, whatever it might be, you're going to reevaluate that decision and take a fresh look as capabilities and markets change. The other 4 methods are the ones we're going to focus on here this afternoon. We're talking about lift and shift, which is rehosting. We'll also cover replatform, repurchase, which is also a replace, and refactor, which is what we see most large enterprises doing as they move business applications to the cloud. And so we'll focus on those 4 migration strategies because those really are where we're moving into cloud-based services. So what do we mean when we talk about lift and shift? We're talking about rehosting. As I mentioned earlier, it's moving that existing server to a cloud server with a similar configuration. Um, how do you access that server once it's in the cloud? There are two widely, general methods. One is to provide network connectivity, which is usually over a secure VPN, effectively extending your local area network into privately configured network in the cloud service provider's environment in that cloud data center, or by providing remote desktop or virtual desktop infrastructure. That's where people open a client agent or web browser, log in, and they're provided with a full desktop that's not physically on their desktop in front of them or on their phone in front of them, but is running remotely in that data center as well on that network that's local to the data center and secure within the data center. Rehosting is often seen as a way of optimizing, and part of the process is we want to look at optimizing not only for performance but for cost as well. And when you rehost, just like you have an ecosystem in your computer room or in your own data center, you need to provide that ecosystem when you rehost into the cloud. So you need identity management. It may not be the same as having primary and secondary domain controllers running on your local area network, but you need a way to ensure that people are who they are, that they have managed access to the systems and services, and that you validate their identity as they move through all the cloud services. Just as you should be backing up and having a business continuity solution for your on-premise servers, you need to provide for business continuity, backup, and recovery in your cloud-based ecosystem. And you need to manage your security, your permissions, and do your data loss prevention just as you would if the system is local. And so rehosting, is it just moving from a piece of hardware to a virtualized machine in the cloud? For the most part, yes. But there are some advantages to it. We'll talk about that down the road here in this session. Replatforming is similar to rehost. That's sort of the starting point. However, when you replatform, you are modifying portions of the architecture to leverage cloud efficiencies. So for example, oftentimes rehosting is the first step, and then there'll be some replatforming, which is changing the way you connect those business apps running on that rehosted server to your collaboration suites, whether it's Office 365 or G Suite. Your data is now in cloud in the same ecosystem as your collaboration tools. If you look at the Office 365 environment, for example, having a SQL Server running in Azure, either as SQL Server on a virtualized machine or migrating from SQL Server to Azure SQL Services, that data is now directly accessible by Power BI, which gives you access to business analytics, setting up dashboards of key performance indicators, being able to do drill down reports, dynamic reports. It opens up a whole range of capabilities for analyzing and communicating the information that comes out of your data. It starts with that rehosting. You then modify the platform a bit to improve connectivity, take advantage of some of the services, and boom, you've added additional value without necessarily adding additional cost. And really leveraging the fact that you're now cloud-based instead of on-premise. Another example that we see oftentimes when people move servers into the cloud, they do an analysis and say, well, wait a minute, a lot of our file data is actually archives that we need occasionally available to reference or to pull down as a starting point for a next project. So common, for example, in architecture, that you might design a build out for a company. 5 years later, they have a hiring phase. They need to adjust that layout. Well, you're never going to change the drawings and the work you did in the past, but you would want to be able to pull those out of an archive and start to modify them and move forward on the new project. Well, keeping all of your historical work in frontline storage, it can be less expensive to do it in the cloud than it is on premise. There are tiered storage options that can even further lower the cost. And so you have the ability to create a tiered storage methodology where you're able to manage the cost and even improve usability as far as people accessing information goes. So replatform starts with the rehost, but then you're modifying portions of your architecture to start taking advantage of some of the native cloud services and some of those cloud efficiencies. When we talk about repurchase, we're talking about replacing an existing system with the new cloud solution. The most common of which we see is people, we pull out their physical file servers and that data ends up in a file service, whether it's OneDrive and SharePoint on the Office 365 side or Google Drive and Google Shared Drives in the G Suite environment. Sometimes, Dropbox for Business or Box.net is the most appropriate way to manage it. Effectively, you're just taking a physical server that's providing a service and moving that service to a cloud service. Moving desktop versions of QuickBooks to the software as a service version of QuickBooks is another example we see in small businesses. Not always possible because of customizations and third-party connectors. We also see people going from contact management or local CRM to CRM SaaS solutions, whether it's Zoho, Salesforce, Copper, or another solution. So those are examples of saying, hey, we've got the solution, it's on-premise. When we move to the cloud, we're actually take the opportunity to replace that or repurchase with a cloud-based service, may or may not be from the same vendor. Refactoring, is really where we see most enterprise and mid-market companies advancing in the cloud. Because refactoring is really completely reimagining how the application is architected, built, and supported, and how it operates. Typically using cloud native features, right? And why do companies do this? Well, one, first off, they have the resources, financial or IT staffing or development staffing to do this work. But they're really looking to add features. They're looking to create scale. They're looking to improve performance. They're decommissioning a lot of on-premise hardware. These are companies that run data, at least one, if not multiple data centers. By leveraging, by breaking applications and leveraging cloud native services, they can fine-tune performance, functionality, and even the cost benefit analysis. Effectively, you're re-architecting, and oftentimes 100% rebuilding that application or system to specifically run in the cloud. And this is where technologies you might have heard of, like containers, come into play, which provide a level of portability between cloud infrastructures. It's where you get into integrated identity management, data management, security. It's also where you can take advantage of artificial intelligence and machine learning in a highly effective, highly sophisticated way. Most SMBs, most small mid-sized businesses don't have the development or the financial resources to do a lot of refactoring. It's just not financially feasible. When it is, however, it can be a powerful direction and a powerful tool. So the process from going A to B, sort of a comparison across these 6 methods and the 4 we're focusing on, is, is outlined here in the graphic. I won't walk through all the steps, but you can see that different methods have different number of steps and decision processes, and different support from automation and tools and things of that nature. Part of the expertise we bring to the table is not only helping you decide whether refactoring, replacing, replatform, or rehost is the right solution, but let's say you do choose lift and shift into rehost. We can walk through the process and get you from point A to point B in a way that doesn't unexpectedly or unreasonably disrupt the business. There's always some method of validation running in parallel, some shift in small shift in user behavior to get things running, but we work to minimize that disruption and keep your business running smoothly as part of the process. And with each of the different styles, there's different levels of effort for different levels of impact. And this is sort of why SMBs tend, and we see the trend where rehosting often makes a lot of sense, especially when replacing or repurchasing isn't a viable option, right? When you look at the chart on the left, and you look at the cost, effort, and the number of the scope and depth of skills you need for each of these phases, as well as in the horizontals, the time to migrate. Repurchasing is obviously the most cost-effective and least time-consuming and least effort, particularly if you're going from an on-premise version of a system to a cloud version from the same vendor, right? Where you're not migrating between different systems, that can be very fast and efficient. But if you're not going to replatform, if you're not ready to yet, if you're not sure what you're going to do, if you're not, if you don't need to refactor, then rehost gets you the most bang for the buck. And this is where we see most small mid-sized businesses falling right now. Hey, if I can take my accounting system from an on-premise to my vendor's SaaS version, that's great. But oh wait, as we're working with one client now, they have a customized third-party inventory module that isn't SaaS based, that won't run with the SaaS version of this accounting system, for them to repurchase and switch accounting systems is not practical. That's a huge, that is a huge effort. They look at the architecture, they can't move to the cloud version of their accounting service and still keep the inventory module on premise. That architecture doesn't work. So what are we doing? We're rehosting. We're going to move what they have on premise into cloud servers. It's going to provide better accessibility and performance, security, and business continuity. And in fact, we're going to lower their total cost of ownership. They won't be making the major server purchases that they need to within the next 12 to 18 months. And so we're helping them avoid a huge capital expenditure and we'll help them manage the operating expense of running this environment in the cloud. Okay, so the chart on the right sort of takes another look at the migration effort versus the business agility and value. Both these charts come from data based on an analysis of companies that have moved to AWS with Amazon and their web services. You can see that rehost provides a good level of agility and value with relatively lower migration effort. It gets you from point A to point B. You see the benefit for the cost involved. It can be a really good cost value, cost benefit proposition for most small mid-sized businesses. So when do you decide to do the lift and shift? When is it appropriate to rehost, and what are some of the events that trigger it? We see 5 key ones out there in the market, in the business community today, and all of these relate to what business outcomes and how you're running and managing your business. So the first off is end of life. You may have noticed that end of life announcements from Microsoft has sort of been coming fast and furious. Windows 7 ended and sort of didn't, and then it did. There's extended support with XP as well. Windows 8 end of life is now scheduled. It seems like a long way away, but January of 2023 is not. SQL Server, if you're able to run on the current service packs, you've got time. Know that if you're running SQL Server 2008 or 2012 and you're not at Service Pack 4, you're already expired. You're already past end of life. Then if your system doesn't maintain compatibility and run properly with the latest service pack, then support for Microsoft has already ended for the earlier service packs for both 2008 and 2012. 2016, not quite yet, but we're getting there. So it's not just a matter of what version of SQL Server you're running, but which service pack you have, and are you running the most recent upgraded version of each of those communities and each of those services. The other way we're seeing impact of end of life, where it can trigger a decision to look at lift and shift and rehosting, is on the hardware side. Most servers are built and designed and spec'd for a 3 to 5 year lifespan. Most businesses expect they'll depreciate servers over 5 years. Typically after 3 years is when you start running into issues of needing to add memory or disk space. And part of that is because whenever you buy a server or you refresh, by definition, you need to overbuy, right? So an on-premise server works best, for example, if you're only using 70 to 75% of the available disk space. And the rest of that disk space is available for page filing and caching and other system purposes on an interim basis as needed. It also helps you manage seek times and data retrieval times. So if you're looking at buying a new server, you're effectively projecting how much disk space you're going to need over the next 5 years. Now, as we know, demand for the amount of information we create and ends up in our systems is growing, particularly as systems modernize. And so oftentimes, our 5-year projection ends up being a really good 2.5 or 3-year projection. And we find ourselves buying and reallocating disk space midstream in the life of that server. Additionally, as new versions of operating systems and applications come out, because the cost of memory is so relatively low compared to what it was a decade ago, systems tend to demand more. And so whether it's a desktop machine that has 4 gig and really needs 8 of memory, or a server that has 8 and may need 16 or 24 or 32, it comes into play. Also, when you refresh, you have to overbuy, right? It's not enough to have a primary domain controller to run Active Directory in your network. You need a backup, because if anything goes wrong with that primary, your entire business is down. And your domain controller shouldn't be on a file server and shouldn't be on a communications or an application server. So you're looking at multiple physical or virtual servers in that environment, and they should all be running for failover and redundancy, similar versions of the operating system, and have similar lifespans, and managing a staggered buy cycle. For folks who've said, well, you know what, we bought a beefed up server, we're running multiple VMs on it. That's great. It can extend the longevity of your hardware, but it does add administrative and operational complexity and cost, both from a capital expenditure when it's time to refresh, as well as an ongoing administrative cost. And so we see two triggers on the hardware side. One is, hey, or I should say multiple triggers on the hardware side. One is, the hardware is getting old. We're worried about reliability. It's ending. We're ending the period of available warranty from the vendor, so they're not necessarily going to guarantee identical parts or same generation parts, depending on the vendor you work with. And certainly, that's time to think: do I want to buy any new hardware whatsoever? The other time is when you hit that mid-cycle upgrade, where you might be 2.5, 3.5 years into the 5-year lifespan of the server, and suddenly you're thinking, oh man, I need to double the memory and add another, and double my disk space, or add 50% more disk. And you look at the hardware cost, the reconfiguration cost, the rolling impact that has on other parts of your IT operation, like backup and recovery capacity, things of that nature. You can actually trigger a whole range of expenses that are capital in nature, that change the cost, the investment cost, and the return on investment of that initial purchase. And so oftentimes those mid-cycle upgrades are large enough to warrant saying, you know what, maybe instead of doing a mid-cycle upgrade, it's time to start migrating off the server. We will reduce the load on it so that we don't need to upgrade any of the hardware. And over time, between now and when it reaches its end of life, we'll clear everything off and just decommission it, because everything will have moved to cloud-based servers. And so there are a number of migration paths with those, based on where your different trigger is. The next trigger is companies that operate in multiple locations. We've seen, and we've worked with a number of small, mid-sized businesses that have multiple locations, sometimes relatively close to each other, an office and a small manufacturing facility and possibly a warehouse facility, maybe all with even in a 25, 30-mile radius. What happens though, to secure operations, it's expensive to have servers locally on each site. That means backing up from each site. That means additional tech support on each site, or having remote management and admin tools in place to cover each site. If you keep your servers centralized, then you need sufficient bandwidth, that you're accessing those servers at LAN speed and not the slower wide area network speeds. So oftentimes that means expensive point-to-point links for communications. We had a client we worked with that when we entered in, they had 5 T1s bundled into a single pipe to get enough bandwidth, that performance, to access their accounting system from their manufacturing facility to the office, to the corporate headquarters office, was tolerable for the folks in the manufacturing facility who needed access to that system. And so to have those secure high bandwidth options locally, point to point, or even over longer distance point to point, comes at a pretty significant cost. Another strategy, if you have multiple locations, is to do point to point VPNs. You can go over the internet. The problem is, even though you can secure yourself over the public internet, you can't manage the quality of the service, and you're subject to outages, you're subject to slowdowns for your critical business data. And having those point-to-point VPNs adds configuration complexity and adds performance overhead. And yeah, there's services you can have. We've worked with clients who've done MPLS managed services, where a vendor actually manages the on-premise routers and the wide area connections, so it's transparent. There's one pipe out to the internet off that MPLS cloud. There are a lot of options there, but they all come at a cost. When you start moving your systems to the cloud, when you have multiple locations, you're not connecting office to office anymore. Each office is going to connect to the cloud, which means you just need direct internet access. And granted, you can still secure it over an additional VPN service. Using remote desktop or virtual desktop infrastructure creates a secure connection as well. but effectively you now create a single point of contact and you're minimizing the infrastructure you need centrally and at each site to get the job done. The other component of that is if all you need to access your servers is a broadband internet connection, then having alternate paths, alternate means of getting from your office or your factory to that data center, to that cloud service, there are multiple options available, and they tend to be less expensive than point-to-point connections, sometimes significantly so. Excuse me. So the next reason is companies that are starting to see expanded remote and mobile users. When we look at these companies, some of the requirements they have that are really, facilitated by the clouds, having a cloud-centric solution, having your servers in the cloud, is that you're both device and location agnostic. You can establish that secure connection and work not only from your Windows or your Mac laptop, but Android devices, iOS devices, smartphones, etc., guest computers in hotel lobbies, etc. You're location agnostic. So unlike if your systems are running internally where you might have LAN-to-LAN secure networks, the cloud really doesn't care where you are. As long as you have that internet connection, you have a method to securely access your data. So it lets you leverage that available internet service more easily. And since there are generally more than one way to access the internet at any given location, whether it's local Wi-Fi or direct to 4G LTE or the upcoming 5G networks, you can have different paths in to get that connectivity. You also end up avoiding a lot of expensive infrastructure that you have if you're going to have systems on site that people are accessing remotely. And in the SMB space with local governments, we see a lot of creative things. We see VPN equipment, beefed up, expensive, router firewalls or VPN concentrators put in place. We see companies running their own remote desktop services. So they're running multiple remote desktop service gateway servers and connection brokers. Or in some cases we've seen companies that have 4 or 5 PCs sitting on a shelf running 724 that are set up to do PC to PC mirroring using something like GoToMyPC, so that you've got a full PC, full laptop, with the human connecting to to a dedicated PC that's physically on the internal network. All of these are expensive to deploy, they're expensive to manage, they're expensive to maintain, expensive to upgrade, and they provide, and oftentimes they provide a very different user experience from someone sitting in the office to someone out in the field. With the cloud, your user experience is going to be a lot more similar across the different methods. So certainly we can put servers in the cloud and extend your LAN using secure VPN over high-speed broadband internet access. We can also provide cloud remote desktop, and effectively here what you're doing is you're avoiding the need for on-premise hardware. The end client that the user can be anything. We're agnostic about that as long as that client has some form or multiple forms of internet access, and what you get is scalable resources. And you also get an improved level of security so that the actual client running the application as well as the server serving that application are both located in a secure network in a cloud data center as part of a cloud service, whether it's Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure. And so on the right side of the screen, we have a simple architecture diagram where you have your remote clients connecting over the internet into a virtual private, it's a virtual network, it's private to you. There is that gateway server that maps out where you're going. You've got your domain and your DNS server, a connection broker and managing the connection licenses. And then you've got, your different session hosts, right, that are running the applications and running the services you need. Maybe you have a dedicated application server for a specific application. The issue here is that when we start looking at those session hosts where your client, where that remote desktop client's actually running, that's scalable, right? So during the day, if you've got 25 people, you might need 4 of these running. But at night, when only a few people work or check in, or third shift is small, second shift you might only need 2, third shift you might only need 1. We can scale up or down the environment, save you money, tune your operating costs to your actual business need. And again, this is sort of using an Azure model. for what it might look like in a Microsoft model. And you see part of that is providing the connection to Office 365 as well, so that you integrate your business applications, your in-house servers with your collaboration tools and your day-to-day services. And so here's why remote desktop in a set of cloud-based servers can be more operationally and cost efficient than building and maintaining and servicing that infrastructure in-house. Okay, the next trigger point becomes one for business continuity. So first and foremost, I'm going to jump to the bottom of the slide. Having your servers in a cloud data center managed as part of Azure or Google Cloud Platform or another cloud service limits your risk for disaster. Why these data centers are built to withstand disasters. Additionally, as we set up your environment, we can provide at a very low cost full geographic redundancy if necessary. It's an incremental cost, much less than trying to do it yourself or providing a mechanism to do it based on on-premise systems, either through a second location of yours or contracting with a disaster recovery company to have servers at the ready should you need to spin up. Now, there are some cost-effective solutions that allow small, mid-sized companies to run for an interim period in a cloud data center should their premise become unavailable. But again, it adds a level of complexity to your environment and to your cost. So when we talk about business continuity, stepping back, we're talking more than data restore. We're talking about how quickly you can get yourself back to manage and be where you've returned to operations, or what's your RTO time, and what does that need to be for your business to remain healthy. A lot of focus in business continuity says, what do you do about your local hardware and systems? And is that going to go up to the cloud, or do you have a second location? When we look at business continuity, we look at everything, not only what remains on premise, but what's in the cloud as well. So another advantage of moving servers from on-premise into cloud services like Azure and GCP is that cloud-to-cloud backup and geo-redundancy makes business continuity easier and more cost-effective than building out business continuity and DR solutions for on-premise components and on-premise servers in particular. And finally, the trigger is, are you ready for transformation? I know digital transformation is a buzzword, and those of you who know me know I sort of hate the buzzwords, or at least I like to invent my own. But when we talk about transformation, studies have shown and research has shown, not only from the major vendors, but from some universities and business schools, that business transformation is easier to start when the systems are already in the cloud. And that's because the shift from where you are to where you want to be can be done in manageable incremental steps once you're in the cloud. And that sort of getting to the cloud initially can be the roadblock. And if you're doing digital transformation, you're not just moving your systems to the cloud, you're probably re-architecting, restructuring, rebuilding parts of it. It becomes a much more complex process. Whereas if your applications and services are running in the cloud, even if it's as a rehost, the next step is going to be an incremental process, and makes it much more manageable and easier to phase and roll out and develop and deploy over time. So it's easier to start in the cloud. It also creates an opportunity to remove redundant services. We're really big on this now. We look at organizations that have moved to G Suite or the Microsoft 365 ecosystems. Those come with services. Oftentimes our clients are paying third parties to provide some of those same services. With user education and the right administration and support, we can eliminate the need for those third-party services, lower your total cost of operation, your total cost of ownership, help you save that money, as well as direct your users and guide them and help them use the tools that are most integrated into your ecosystem. Another trigger for transformation is the ability to connect data to collaboration. I've mentioned this a couple of times, right? So if I'm running an application that has a SQL Server database in the back end, and I've got Office 365 as my collaboration suite, I move that server into Azure. Even if it's just a rehost, I can now connect Power BI to that SQL Server database without having to worry about network I/O charges and the impact on bandwidth. for all of my users back down to my headquarters. And in making that connection, I now have the ability to generate reports, do interactive reporting, create dashboards, do business intelligence and business analytics on a larger scale. And that's sort of a prime example. There are many other examples of being able to connect data to your collaboration tools simply by having, it's easier, less expensive, more reliable, by having those servers either running as rehosted servers or eventually migrating to cloud services in the Azure or GCP environment. And then the fourth trigger we see as transformation is the desire to use the low code and no code automation. And this is where you get into sort of embedding AI and machine learning into some of your workflows, right? So, if your systems are on premise and you've got a business system on premise and you want to add workflow to it, you're either talking about redevelopment or now you're talking about buying a workflow management tool that you now need servers for and to install on premise and to manage and integrate and back up, and you're increasing your infrastructure, you're increasing your capital expenditure there as well as your operating cost. If those servers are in the cloud, you have the low code and no code automation services available as cloud services already. Google has them, Microsoft has them, Amazon has third parties and their own tools that do this as well. So adding automation, workflow, support, building machine learning into processes, again, it becomes an affordable and incremental process rather than something that requires a huge investment of time, money, development resources, etc. And so transformation, and sometimes it's the most powerful trigger for rehosting and the lift and shift, even when companies know they want to do it and aren't clear, exactly where they're going, or even more, more than the first step or two that they want to try. That rehosting, that lift and shift becomes fundamental to sort of setting up the playing field, which lets you see what you can accomplish as you move forward through that iterative process of business transformation. So when we talk about rehosting and lift and shift, there's certainly some considerations. First, when you talk about the considerations around migration, timing, we're in IT, there's never a good time. There can also never be, in some respects, a bad time to do this. You look at the cost of migration and the operating costs, again, sound analysis and planning. When we look at the 5-year or 7-year total cost of ownership of servers and the systems they're running, we should provide comparable or lower cost. Some companies, realize savings of up to 60 or 70% in their total cost of ownership over that time period. In many ways, because we can leverage the way cloud services work, the on-demand and scalability portion for parts of your ecosystem, so that we're only actually running the services that you need when you need them, and we're not keeping servers up and running overnight or weekends that aren't going to be used during those time frames. The other migration consideration is also the user impact. Moving to cloud, granted, if you're extending your local area network into your cloud data center in your cloud service, the user impact should be transparent for the most part. There shouldn't even see latency delay in how they do their work. If you move to remote desktop, the human interaction between their computers is going to change. Instead of coming in, logging in, and just working locally, they're going to come in, they're going to launch that client, remote desktop client, they're going to log in, and boom, they're going to get their work done. So in some sense, there's an automatable extra step in there that gets them in and working, but again, you want to consider the user impact. And a part of the user impact means making sure your printing mechanisms and some of the other, being able to scan from a scanner to your, drive or to your email are all configured properly as you make this shift as well, comes into play. The next consideration is utilization. When do you actually need these systems running? Some will obviously be 7/24, 365. Others may correlate with shift work or times of business and business activity. And again, whether you want that remote desktop method or you want to extend the LAN or some combination thereof, really consider how you're going to utilize these systems, how you utilize them today, and what's the most appropriate way of shifting them into the cloud to gain the most benefit. And last, and certainly not least, in fact, probably the most important is, what are the business outcomes you're trying to achieve? What are the business results you're looking to gain over the next 12 to 36 months? and understanding how making your IT and CAN, shifting your servers from on-premise to the cloud, be part of the methods, part of the tool set, part of the solutions you use to achieve those business outcomes that you want. Because desired business outcomes and results should drive necessary or desired technology results, which should then drive technology initiatives. Does lift and shift, does rehosting or replatforming or repurchasing fit into that and fit into that role and support the tools, the resources, the processes you need to change, the way you do your business, how you're going to change to get those desired business outcomes. And of course, part of that desired outcome is what's the cost impact as you move from a model that has heavy capital expenditure as well as significant operating costs to an operating cost model. And what does that do to your total cost of ownership? What's the impact on your balance sheet, on your P&L, on your bottom line? And all of those come into play. So what's your action item for today? The first is really to assess, when was the last time you had a good conversation about your business objectives and outcomes? Hey, we're at the top of the calendar year. That's often a fiscal year for us business owners. So chances are, late last year or early this year, you said, hey, what do I want to have happen in 2020? And maybe you're even looking, what do I want to have happen in 2020, 2021, and 2022? What are the goals? What are the challenges we need to resolve? What are the new initiatives? What are the new opportunities we want to exploit? What do I want the business to look like a year, 2 years, 3 years from now? If you have that assessment, whether it's formal or informal, even just some, cogitative ideas floating around in your mind, that's great. Compared to where you want to be with your business outcomes, what are your current needs and readiness to get there? Where do the needs exist? Then we can look at the value proposition and say, hey, rehosting, lift and shift is it's a foundational step that can help a lot of those business outcomes by enabling a whole range of technology initiatives, as well as helping you manage total cost of ownership of your IT and simplifying your IT environment in many ways. So what's the value proposition? Is it worthwhile? Is it a worthwhile foundational step for you and your business? And if your initial response is no, I don't think so, okay, so what's the cost of not doing it? Play it out. If you don't do this shift, what's the cost? When are you going to have to replace your systems? If you want to add capabilities, what's that cost going to be? Not just from, hey, we have to buy this software, but it has to go on this type of server that we now have to back up, that we now have to maintain, that we have to update, etc. So look at the total cost and the value proposition of doing something and making this foundational change with lift and shift versus not doing anything and just continuing with the status quo. Most of our clients that do this analysis, some definitely say, hey, cost of doing, it's definite, it's a no-brainer, let's do it. Most of our clients are, well, we may see a benefit, we may not. It's hard to say. These are tough predictions to make. We've got a lot of assumptions in the mix. When they step back and look at the cost of not doing, the decision becomes much more clear. And for many, if not most, the cost of not doing, really demonstrates the impact of making a change and moving forward with and modernizing your IT infrastructure. Granted, for some, the cost of not doing says, hey, no, we're not ready. It's not the right time, and we respect that, and we'll help you make that determination. If you decide the value proposition's there, the next is, what's the strategic plan? What's the end game going to look like? As far out as you're able and willing to look, or it's feasible to look. For some organizations, it's a year to 18 months. For others, it's 3 years or 5 years. And once you come up with a strategic direction that you want to go in, what are those tactical phases? What's the first project we need? And that first project might be the lift and shift. It may be something else with the lift and shift coming later. If the lift and shift and that rehosting is first, what's second and third? Let's map it out so you have a roadmap. Granted, every time we finish a project, we can reassess the value proposition and reassess the tactical phases against your strategic goals and objectives, so that we're constantly checking and making sure that we're on target to make those business outcomes a reality. So at this point, I've covered a lot of ground. Again, we talk a lot about how business of different sizes use the cloud differently. And yes, larger enterprises have the resources internally, and financially to effectively rebuild and take advantage of all of the microservices and serverless environments and base level services of the cloud. Small mid-sized companies, small mid-sized businesses don't have those resources. So the method of getting from point A to point B is different, but can still have a material impact. So at this point, I want to open it up to if anyone has any questions at this point. It's a great time to ask. There's a questions icon on the top or the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to ask away now. If not, and something comes to you later in mind, you have our general contact information here on the screen, email in both our toll-free and our standard phone number. So if you're not in the US, it's +1 508 948 4070. You also have my email and phone number. Now, I will tell you that I am awful about, I don't answer the phone if I'm in the middle of something, and I'm awful about checking and responding to voicemails. The best way to reach me and get a good response is by email, afalcon@cumulusglobal.com. That is my email. I don't have an assistant who filters things. I will respond. I will loop in the right resources for my company. And if our company isn't the right resource, we will find and introduce you to one that is. So that's part of the service we provide as well, and part of our commitment to you as a fellow small, mid-sized business owner. We want to provide value, even if we're not the solution to your problem or your immediate need. So feel free to reach out and contact us or contact me at any time. And with that, since I don't have any questions coming through, I want to welcome everyone and say thank you again for joining us. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day and week to join us for these webcasts and to watch these recordings on demand. So please have a great day, have a great week, and if there's anything we can do to help you further your business goals and objectives, please let us know.